Puppy found inside a backpack thrown in the woods, but a small detail on the zipper revealed a shocking story. Have you ever felt as if time stopped for a few seconds when faced with something that your heart simply cannot ignore? As if, even in the midst of the silence of the world, something screamed inside you, "Look again." It's as if destiny gave one last chance to save a life. And in that case, life pulsed weakly, almost extinguishing, inside an old backpack forgotten among bushes and dry leaves, a cry for help hidden inside what many would never notice. But it was there, and it was real. The cry was so subtle that it could be mistaken for the sound of the wind scratching the zipper or the distant song of a bird. But he was insistent, and each sound carried an urgency that only those who have felt their hearts break when they saw an animal suffering can understand. It was a sound that didn't just come from the throat, but from the soul, a small moan filled with fear, hunger, and loneliness. Inside there was not only a fragile body, there was also the suspended hope that love somehow could still find it. The backpack didn't smell like childhood or school. It smelled of abandonment, of old rain, of dried mud. Inside it, curled up in a corner as if trying to disappear, was a little puppy, tiny. Her little body trembled almost imperceptibly, but enough to betray the cold that soaked her fragile bones. His fur, matted and dirty, hid wounds that looked fresh. The thin paws, without the strength to support their own weight, shrank as if seeking protection from a world that, until then, had only offered pain. The eyes, still half open, were cloudy, not for lack of light, but for the absence of hope. It was as if he no longer expected to see anything good. I only knew the dark, the damp, the stuffy of that makeshift prison. No familiar smell, no warm touch, no familiar sound. It was just him, and oblivion. In that first breath after the zipper opened, the air felt heavier, as if he was trying to understand if what was happening was real or just another delusion of a body on the verge of its end. A small sigh escaped, almost like a shy relief, but even that he couldn't sustain for long. Her empty little tummy hadn't received anything in days. His muscles, still in formation, already knew what weakness was, and his heart, even beating in a fragile rhythm, insisted. It's difficult to imagine what's going on inside a being that has never had a lap, who never heard the sound of a loving voice, who doesn't even know the feeling of having a name. There is no good memory. There is no memory that warms. There is only now, and now hurts. Every tremor of his body was more than cold. It was loneliness. It was a call for the world not to forget him, as if even so small he still believed he could be saved, that someone would listen, that someone would see. We tend to think that animals are fragile because they don't talk, but sometimes their silence is louder than any scream. And there, in that bush at that moment, that puppy screamed with everything he had left in his life. He screamed with his eyes turned off, his bones exposed, his breathing labored. He screamed with his heart. A silent scream that only those who truly love can hear. His days until then had been short, but too long for those who had only known contempt. He wasn't just a lost puppy. It was a thread of life hanging between abandonment and hope, an innocent soul thrown into the world as if it didn't matter. But it mattered, and a lot. It is inevitable not to ask yourself, who would do something like this? What would have led someone to simply place it there, hidden, as if its existence were a mistake? The kind of question that tears you up inside. How revolting, how unworthy, but which also moves us. Because at some point in this story, it will become clear that he wasn't there by chance. Despite everything, there was a subtle rhythm in his chest that didn't want to stop. As if deep down he knew it wasn't the end yet. That bush, that backpack, that pain, everything was part of something bigger, something that still needed to happen, something that, somehow, he was destined to reveal. Meanwhile, he waited, not because I knew what came next, but because his heart insisted on continuing. And sometimes, all a being so small needs is that one more beat, a breath of faith, a second of courage, an interval between the end and the beginning. The world can be cruel, but love always finds a way, and perhaps that was what still warmed his tired body. The possibility, however remote, that somewhere, someone was coming, someone with ears sensitive enough to hear the sound of your pain. Someone with a heart prepared to understand that inside that backpack there was more than one puppy. There was a story, a mystery, a destiny intertwined with something that was yet to be discovered. And that's why, even when everything seemed to have been lost, he resisted. Now tell me, how many times has the love of your life arrived without warning? How many times has an unnamed pain become the beginning of a story that you would never forget? What this puppy didn't know, and may never understand, is that there was something in those woods that destiny needed to sew up. Something that would soon stir the past, awaken memories, and touch lives that had no idea being connected to it. But before that, he needed to be found. And when that moment comes, you will understand why his heart insisted on beating, because sometimes what seems like just a chance is love taking its first steps. And that was just the beginning. You felt that too, right? That tightness in your chest, that lump in your throat. It's because stories like that don't go unnoticed by those who have a heart that truly loves. Those who truly feel in the eyes of an abandoned puppy the weight of 1,000 silences. And only those with a big soul understand the value of such a small life. This is a place for people like you, who cry, vibrate, and connect with stories that move you deeply. Here, each dog has a voice, each abandonment becomes a reunion, and each hidden pain finds a home within the hearts of those who watch. So let's turn stories like this into something even greater together. Be part of this community that values what really matters. Press the like to spread this emotion and subscribe to the channel to never again miss a story that touches the soul. Here, each video is a hug. Come with us. Have you ever felt like something called you, even without sound, without words, just a sensation, a slight shiver, like a silent warning that something was out of place, waiting for you? Sometimes life speaks to us like this and only listens to those whose hearts are quiet enough to understand. And that's exactly what happened on that ordinary morning, which wasn't anything special, until it was. The sky was cloudy, as if the day also carried a weight that I couldn't explain. The wind blew weakly, carrying the smell of wet earth and freshly fallen leaves. And there, in that simple interior setting, an elderly man walked through the woods near his house. He did this almost every day with slow but steady steps. That piece of trail with familiar trees and paths already marked by his boots was his little refuge. But that morning, something was different. First came the sound. It wasn't tall, but it didn't fit in with the surrounding nature. A muffled noise, almost a groan that seemed to come from somewhere in the bushes. He stopped, listened. He frowned. It wasn't the sound of a bird or the sound of a branch breaking. It was life, weak but insistent. Something, or someone, was there. Moved by an impulse that not even he could explain, he followed the sound. He pushed leaves, brushed aside branches, and finally saw it. A backpack, old, dirty, with mud stains and the zipper half open. Alone there, she looked out of place, as if she had been thrown in hastily. He approached slowly, as if he felt he was about to witness something that would change everything. As he crouched down and touched his backpack, the sound returned. Clearer now, a faint lament. The zipper slowly gave way. And then, the world stopped for a second. Inside it, curled up like a bundle of wet cloth, was a little puppy, so small, so fragile, it barely seemed real. His half-closed eyes tried to react to the dim light that now invaded that tight space. He was shaking, but not from fear. It was the cold mixed with exhaustion, with hunger, with the pain of someone who was already giving up. The gentleman swallowed hard. He didn't have time to think much. It was either act or watch that little life disappear right there in front of you. With calloused hands but a soft heart, he took the coat off his body and wrapped the cub carefully, almost as if he feared that any movement could break it. Human. Warmth was the first caress that small body had felt in days, perhaps the first in my entire life. Holding the little package to his chest, he began to walk back, but it didn't take long for the pace to turn into running. The path that once seemed short now stretched out like an eternity. The cub's breathing was shallow, weak. It seemed like at any moment it could stop, and every second lost hurt like a stab in the old man's chest, who could only think, "Hold on, please." Arriving home, he had no doubts. He filled a small bowl with warm water and tried to wet the puppy's mouth with his fingers. Nothing. He tried again, this time with more patience. A slight movement of the tongue responded, weak but present. It was a small victory in the midst of chaos. Got milk. Warm just right, like a hug. He used an old medicine syringe to try to give small drops. 1, 2, 3. With each small acceptance, hope grew. It was almost imperceptible, but the puppy's eyes began to react to the light. The body gradually stopped shaking, as if he were finally finding shelter, as if to say with his silence, "Thank you for seeing me." That simple house, with the smell of wood and freshly brewed coffee, was transformed into an improvised care center. Warm cloths, respectful silence, and a man who, even with his hands a little shaky, did everything with touching delicacy. Time now seemed measured in breaths, and each new breath was an achievement. For hours, that man didn't let go. He carefully wiped his dirty paws. He took small sticks out of his fur. He wiped off the crusts of dried blood with a damp cloth, and at no point did he let go of his gaze. There was something about that puppy, something that he still didn't understand, but that held tight to his chest, as if for some reason that meeting hadn't been by chance. As time passed, small improvements appeared. A slight movement of the head, a timid lick of the fingertip, a soft moan, like a mumble from someone, starting to wake up from a nightmare. It was like watching life come back in slow motion. A new beginning built drop by drop, affection by affection. And there, between improvised blankets and respectful silence, a connection was born. You don't need words for that, just one look, a sigh. That little dog, who had been thrown away as if he were worthless, now had a home. And more than that, there was someone who saw in him what no one else saw. But there was something strange, something that still didn't make sense. That backpack, and why was it there? Why would someone hide a puppy like that? And why, even so weakened, did that little being still carry in its eyes a story that hadn't been told? The old gentleman didn't know, yet. But something inside him said that this wasn't just another case of abandonment. There was something more, something that he would discover soon, and that would change not only the cub's life, but memories that he didn't even know he still carried. Meanwhile, the puppy slept, finally at peace, breathing deeply, warm, protected, perhaps for the first time dreaming of something other than darkness. He didn't yet know that his story was just beginning, but I felt it, and sometimes that's enough. Now tell me, after an encounter like this, can you continue to believe that coincidences exist, or are some hearts really destined to meet, even when the whole world tries to stop it? The story doesn't end there, because where there is love, there is also mystery, and this puppy still has a secret that will change everything. Have you ever noticed how sometimes love begins in silence, not with words or promises, but with a simple gesture, like reaching out and holding a fragile body without expecting anything in return? That's exactly how that bond began to be born, in the silent care of a man who, without knowing it, was becoming the home that puppy needed so much. After the desperate rush, the minutes that seemed eternal, while the puppy's heart beat weakly and irregularly, there was finally a break, a chance, a sigh of hope. The house was simple, with walls marked by time and old furniture that told stories in itself. But there, what mattered most was the heat, not that of the wood stove or the makeshift blankets, but the warmth that comes from within, from an open heart. The man, with his hands still shaking from fright and haste, prepared what he could. Some warm milk, a bowl of fresh water, dry and clean cloths. Nothing there was luxury, but everything was done with so much care that even time seemed to move slower, respecting that moment as fragile as it was precious. The cub could barely move, its thin paws stretched out, tired, and its eyes, still half closed, weren't focusing on anything. But the warmth of the cloth around his body was already a relief. The first lick of milk, although hesitant, brought a slight, almost imperceptible reaction, as if the body began, little by little, to believe that it no longer needed to fight alone. It was then that the first deep sigh came, that breath that seems to release the accumulated pain, and with it, a small moan, this time not of despair, but of relief. The old man, with teary eyes, held the bowl and murmured low words, as if apologizing for the world having been so cruel. There was no one else there to listen, but the cub listened. I felt, and in that instant, something began to change. With each tremor that stopped, with each little lick with more force, the connection between the two strengthened. An invisible link built not by time but by delivery. Because deep down, that man also needed to be saved, even if he didn't know it. And that puppy, so weak, so close to giving up, was now the spark that rekindled a forgotten light inside the house. The light of care, of presence, of responsibility for a life beyond your own. As the hours passed, the little puppy began to move his head more steadily. He tried, with difficulty, to lift his snout. His eyes were now opening a little more clearly, even though they were desperately searching for a familiar face, which he still didn't have. But there was there, right in front of him, someone who was trying to be everything he never had. And it didn't take long for the first gesture to come, the shy lick on the man's finger. It was so slight, so subtle, that he almost didn't notice it. But when he felt it, he stopped. He looked at the cub as if recognizing something sacred. It was more than gratitude. It was a silent request to stay. A thank you said with the little strength he still had left. That man who had been walking alone for so long was now sitting on the kitchen floor with a puppy on his lap and a lump in his throat. There was a different peace in that house, as if somehow the universe was organizing the pieces of the puzzle of life, as if that little life there had been sent to remember that love still existed and that the heart was still capable of starting over. In the days that followed, care became routine. Time for milk, time to clean the eyes, to change the cloths, time to talk to that being who didn't respond with words, but with looks and sighs. Every sign of improvement was celebrated in silence, a little tail that moved for a second longer, a hoarse, shy bark, but full of desire to exist. The old man mentally noted each progress, as if he were learning again the value of small things. And the house, previously too silent, now had new sounds. The sound of paws on the floor, the sound of the bowl being pushed with the nose, the soft sigh of the puppy sleeping peacefully, sounds that, for many, would go unnoticed, but that, for that man, were like music, music that healed, which filled. One morning, the puppy tried to stand on its own. He staggered, fell, but tried again. The old man, kneeling in front of him, couldn't contain his smile, that discreet smile of someone who keeps happiness in his eyes. Seeing that little warrior trying to stand up, even though he was still so weak, was like watching a silent miracle happening there before his feet. The connection between them needed no labels. There was no need to give a name to what was being built there, but it was strong. You could see it in the way the puppy followed him with his eyes, even without the strength to walk. In the way the old man spoke to him like someone talking to an old friend. It was affection in its purest form, delivery without expectations, care without demands. There was still a lot to happen, many unanswered questions. That mysterious backpack, the puppy's past, the marks on its body, the reason for being there. All of this still hung in the air, like an invisible thread that connected that moment to something bigger. But now was not the time to think about that. Now it was time to take care, to protect, to be present. Hope, which seemed so distant at first, now began to inhabit the corners of the house. It was in the full bowl, in the clean blanket, in the puppy's firmer gaze. It was mainly in that human heart that, despite being hardened by life, had found a reason to love again. And sometimes, that's all life needs to start over. A calm breath, a silent caress, a look that says, I'm here. But this puppy's story still holds more than signs of hope. Keep a secret, something that has yet to be discovered, and that perhaps explains why all this is happening. After all, some encounters are not just coincidence. Some meetings are called. They are answers. They are the beginning of something that the heart does not yet understand, but it already feels. Have you ever had that feeling that something hasn't been fully revealed yet? As if, even though everything seems to be falling into place, there is a loose thread, something hidden, waiting for the right moment to emerge. It was that kind of feeling that hung in the air in that house. The little puppy was starting to get better. He breathed more steadily, took a few short steps, and even showed joy when he recognized the man's presence. But while life gained color again, something was still there, pulsing in silence, a mystery still unsolved. It all started on an ordinary afternoon. The old man had decided to wash the backpack in which he had found the puppy. It was dirty, covered in mud, dry leaves, and a strong smell of abandonment. I didn't want to keep her, it was true, but somehow I felt like I needed to look into it more. There was something about that backpack that bothered him. I didn't know what, but I felt it. He spread newspapers on the table, put on gloves, and delicately emptied each compartment. Dirt came out, crumpled papers came out, an old elastic band, food crumbs, until he saw it. One detail. A zipper. One of those internal ones, hidden inside the frayed fabric. He pulled slowly. And there, at the bottom of the backpack, almost invisible, stuck crookedly, was a small label. The kind that mothers stick on their children's school materials. Light blue, slightly faded, with children's letters. Samuel M. He read it and stopped. A child's name, carefully recorded, so out of place in that dirty, discarded object. The name seemed to smile at a past that no longer existed, and at that moment the man's heart sank. He couldn't understand why, but that name moved him. Samuel M. Who was this boy? Why was your name there? Could he be the previous owner of the backpack? The thought hurt. Because if so, why was there such a small injured cub inside her? The old man leaned back in his chair and stared at the label, as if trying to hear what it had to say. And it was then that an idea took over his mind. I needed to find out where that backpack came from. I needed to know who Samuel was. I could no longer live with doubt. The next day, with a restless heart, he went to the city. He took his backpack with him, carefully protected in a plastic bag. He started by asking where he could. First on the market, then at the pharmacy. He showed the tag to the attendants, hopefully, but nothing. Some said they had never heard that name. Others just shook their heads indifferently. But he didn't give up. Something inside him told him he needed to keep going. It was then that he decided to go to the city school, even without knowing if it was the right one. And it was there, in a corridor lit by the afternoon sun, that everything started to make sense. When he showed the backpack to a teacher, he noticed the change in her face. The eyes widened. The smile died on his lips. "Samuel M.?" she repeated, almost in a whisper. And then, with her voice breaking, she added, "That was the name of one of our students." The man's heart pounded. The teacher explained that Samuel had disappeared months before. The tragedy had shocked the community. A devastating fire destroyed a house on the outskirts of the city. Samuel was there. They tried to save him, but he couldn't get out. They said that at the time of the fire, he was desperately trying to find his dog. He was never seen again. The body was found days later, but no one heard from the dog. The story had become something of a sad legend in the city. A boy of courage, an unbreakable bond between him and his pet. But, like so many stories of pain, it ended up being buried by time. The old man felt a shiver. The pieces began to move inside his head, like an old puzzle being hastily put together. The backpack, the puppy, the name, the story. Everything now seemed connected. But how? How did that little puppy end up there in the bush, days or maybe weeks after the fire? And why hasn't anyone found it before? He returned home with a tight chest. I needed to look at the puppy again. I wanted to see some answer in his eyes. When he entered, he found the puppy sleeping peacefully on a heated towel near the fireplace. His chest rose and fell calmly. His hair was already clean, the smell was different, but the eyes, oh, the eyes. When he woke up and looked at the man, there was something there, a depth he couldn't explain, as if that little being carried memories, as if he remembered something he couldn't tell. He remained there, kneeling, watching, and without knowing why, tears began to flow. Maybe it was the pain for the child who was gone. Maybe it was the weight of carrying that discovery. Or maybe it was the confusing, strong feeling that somehow, that dog knew. I felt. It carried within it a part of Samuel's story, something that had survived, something that still needed to be understood. Night fell, but the old man did not sleep. Sitting in the armchair, with his backpack on his lap and the puppy at his feet, he tried to imagine that boy's last hours. I was trying to set up the scene, the house on fire, the fear, the desperation of looking for the dog, the choice to save your friend, even in the face of the flames. And then, the emptiness, the absence, the pain that remained. But there was one question that kept bouncing around in his head. Who put the puppy in the backpack, and why? Could it have been the boy himself? Had he somehow managed to protect the dog in the last moments, in the hope that someone would find him? Or could it be that someone, upon seeing the scene, saved the puppy, but didn't have the courage to take care of it, throwing him into the bush as a last-ditch attempt to give him a chance? The possibilities. shuffled around in the man's mind and no answer came clearly. But he knew one thing. This was no coincidence. That dog wasn't just another abandoned dog. He was part of something much bigger, of a love story, of loss, and maybe, just maybe, a reunion. The old man looked again at the cub, now awake and lying next to him with his eyes fixed on him, and in that deep silence, something between the two was said, without words, without sound, a recognition, as if that little animal was saying, "You found me. Now help me remember who I am." And it is at this point that the story begins to take on new contours, because when love survives fire, distance, and even time, it always finds a way to come back. And that puppy came back, but there was still a lot to be discovered, much that the old man needed to understand, because the backpack, the name, and the dog's eyes now pointed to a truth that was still hidden, and his heart, although hurt, was ready to follow the clues. Because deep down, he knew this story was far from over. Have you ever heard a story that even before it ends starts to hurt? That there is a weight that you feel in your chest, even without knowing all the details? That's exactly what the old man felt when he returned home with that discovery throbbing inside his chest. The name Samuel M. It wasn't just a mark on a forgotten backpack. It was the beginning of an open wound. A name that carried pain, memory, and a connection he was still trying to understand. Sitting next to the puppy with his backpack on his lap, and his gaze lost in space, the man felt like he needed to know more. Not out of curiosity, but out of respect. Something inside him told him that the dog there at his feet, which now followed him around the house, with its eyes attentive and its head always resting on his leg, was more than a survivor. It was a living piece of an interrupted love story. He returned to the city the next day. The teacher who had recognized the name was willing to help. They sat on a bench in the square, with their hands folded in their laps, and she began to count. And each word was like a gentle blow, the kind that doesn't hurt on the outside, but leaves deep marks on the inside. Samuel was a boy with an easy smile and bright eyes. He was just 8 years old when the tragedy happened. He lived with his mother and younger brother in a simple house on the outskirts. Life was difficult, but there was never a lack of affection. What caught Samuel's attention was the love he had for his dog. Since the day he found the puppy abandoned in a cardboard box near the school, they have not been separated. The teacher remembered well the day Samuel took the puppy hidden in his backpack to class. It was just a puppy smaller than a pillow. He discreetly took it out during the break, his eyes wide with happiness, and showed it to his friends as if revealing a treasure. He called the animal Bolt. He said he chose the name because he was fast and brave, just like the character in the cartoon. Since then, the boy had been attached to the dog. They played, slept together, ate from the same plate when there was little food. The bond between the two was evident. One cared for the other as if they were part of the same soul. The story took a tragic turn on a cold night, when a short circuit caused a fire in the house. The fire spread quickly. Neighbors reported hearing screams, running, and then silence suffocated by the flames. The mother and brother managed to get out in time, but Samuel no. They said he ran back into the house shouting, "Bolt's in there, I'm going to get Bolt." Firefighters arrived minutes later, but it was too late. They found the boy's body near the kitchen, as if he had been trying to open a door, perhaps looking for the dog. The dog's body was never found. They searched for days among the rubble. They searched streets and land, but nothing. What remained was an unanswered pain. The community, small and accustomed to losses, was shaken. The boy became a symbol of love and courage, and the dog's disappearance became one of those mysteries that we carry like a scar. While the teacher spoke, the old man listened in silence. But inside, the heart was beating hard. It was as if all the pieces were in front of him now, but the image was still blurred. The dog you found in the bush. Could it be Bolt? The same puppy. Those deep eyes, that look of someone who has lived longer than they should, now seemed to scream. He returned home slower, more reflective. When he opened the door, he found the puppy sitting on the same rug, waiting. When he saw him, he wagged his tail lightly and walked towards him, putting his nose against his leg, as he always did. But this time the man looked different. He didn't just see a rescued puppy, saw a living history, saw Samuel. He saw the love that resisted the flames. He sat on the floor, crossed his legs, and the puppy lay down on them, as if that were the safest place in the world. And maybe it was. There, in the warmth of a lap that would not abandon him, little Bolt finally found a piece of what he lost. But the old man couldn't get the question out of his head that was now gnawing at him inside. How did he survive? Who took him away? How did it end up in the woods, inside the owner's backpack? The mystery was now greater and even more moving, because it wasn't just about abandonment. It was about a love that was so strong, so true, that even after the death of one, the other continued to seek shelter. He continued waiting. He continued living. Samuel's story was no longer a forgotten tragedy. She lived there, walking on 4 legs, licking wrinkled fingers, sleeping on makeshift swaddling clothes, and every gesture of that puppy brought with it the memory of a boy who did not hesitate to give his own life for love, who ran into the flames for those he considered family, who didn't measure fear or danger to try to protect his best friend. The old man felt the weight and beauty of it all. In his calloused hands there was now more than a dog. There was a mission to honor this history, of being the home that Bolt didn't have time to find again, and he was willing. Even without all the answers, he knew that Puppy's past mattered, and his future too. At night, when Bolt slept curled up next to the bed, the man lay down with a heart full of mixed emotions, but with a firm certainty something inside that puppy still needed to be revealed, because love, when it is true, does not go out with fire. He transforms, and sometimes he returns in silence, with sad eyes and a small body, just waiting for someone sensitive enough to listen to the story he still has to tell. And he still has, because despite everything, something is still hidden, something Samuel tried to leave behind, something the world hasn't seen yet. But this is about to come to light, and you can change everything. Have you ever felt that restlessness that starts low, almost imperceptible, but grows inside you until it no longer fits? It's like a question that won't leave you alone, even when the world outside seems calm. That was exactly how the old man felt in the days following his discovery of the name. The puppy was already stronger. I ran around the house with little steps that were still shaky, but full of desire. He played with cloths as if he were relearning what it was like to live without fear. But behind those eyes, there was something that didn't change. A look that even in moments of joy kept silence, deep, old. And then the doubt started to hurt. Could it really be Bolt? That little dog that was talked about so much? The inseparable companion of the boy everyone in town learned to love and mourn? Or was it just another puppy, thrown into the backpack by coincidence, a victim of abandonment like so many others? The man asked himself this every day, in silence, as he watched him. I tried to find answers, in small details, the way he lay down, the way he looked at certain corners of the house, the way he seemed to understand words even though he had never been taught. But what tormented him most was something else. How did he survive? The fire, according to reports, had been devastating. The flames engulfed everything within minutes. The boy was found among the wreckage, but not the dog. Disappeared. For months, there was speculation that perhaps he had run away, or that it was buried among the rubble, unreachable. But now in front of that puppy, alive, full of physical and perhaps an emotional scars, everything seemed to point to another possibility. And the more the old man thought about it, the more doubt tightened his chest. Until one day he woke up before the sun rose. The house was still asleep, and the puppy curled up in the corner of the blanket seemed to be dreaming. But the man already knew what he needed to do, not out of stubbornness nor out of curiosity. It was stronger than him. I needed to go to the scene of the fire. He needed to see it with his own eyes, confirming what the heart was already beginning to whisper softly. He put on his coat, adjusted his hat, and looked at the ground. The puppy, now awake, looked at him in silence, as if he knew, as if I was waiting for this too. When he got the keys, the dog slowly got up and went to the door. Didn't bark, didn't jump. He just stood there, standing, waiting. The old man sighed deeply and said, like someone talking to someone who already understands more than they let on, "Shall we?" The path to the old ground was slow. The two followed together, side by side, as longtime companions. The sun was still hiding behind the trees, and the dirt road seemed quieter than usual. The man carried a mixture of fear and hope, while the puppy walked with its nose glued to the ground, as if following a scent that only it could smell. Upon arriving, they stopped in front of the fallen gate, the house that was once full of life was now a silent pile of rubble. Weeds grew all around, covering parts of what had once been a home. And there, among pieces of burnt wood and cracked bricks, there was still the smell of sadness. The old man entered slowly. The cub hesitated for a second, but soon followed. He walked a few steps, and then stopped. The body tensed. The tail, which had previously been wagging timidly, became firm. The eyes, previously curious, were now fixed on one point, and it was there. At that exact moment that everything changed, the dog started to walk faster. He dodged the wreckage past a fallen column until he stopped in front of a pile of rubble, and there he started barking. It wasn't a bark of fun nor of fright. It was a calling, a warning. The sound was strong but charged with emotion, as if he was trying to say something that his mouth couldn't say. The man approached, his heart racing, and watched as the puppy sniffed the ground, circled the area, and started barking and fussing again. He knew that place. There was no longer any doubt, it was certainty. The way his body moved, the way his eyes roamed every piece of land, showed that this was nothing new. It was memory. That space, now covered in ash and silence, still lived within him. The man knelt down and began removing pieces of wood. I tried to understand why that specific point affected the puppy so much, and it was there, among the remains, that he saw something shine. It was small, dirty, but visibly stored there for some time. He pulled carefully and his heart almost stopped. It was a school pencil case, deformed by the heat of the fire. The edges melted, the color faded, but it was still recognizable. A children's pencil case, and inside it, a note, plasticized, protected as someone who knows that time is unforgiving. The letters were small, made with colored pencil, and trembled slightly along the lines. The old man read in a low voice, almost unable to contain his emotion. "If something happens to me, please take care of Bolt." The phrase echoed in the air like a whisper that passes through time. The signature in the corner, shaky but clear, Samuel M. The man fell to his knees. The tears came like a river that had been dammed for too long. The cub approached, curled up next to him, and laid its head on his knee, as if to say, "Now you know." And the old man knew. I knew everything. Of the boy's courage, of the love that made him protect his friend until the end. The last gesture of care. And the incredible journey that puppy took until he was found. It was the same dog. There was no longer any doubt. Time had passed. Scars had formed, but the heart was the same. And now, finally, he was at peace, because someone had heard his story. And most importantly, someone was there to continue writing what Samuel started. The old man returned home with the puppy in his arms, just like the first time. But now the weight was different. It was no longer just a small body asking for help. It was a legacy, a promise, a love that conquered even the flames. And the most impressive thing is that this story is not over yet. Because when love is this true, it always leaves signs. Signs that the heart recognizes, even when the eyes don't yet understand. And there was more to come. Because Bolt still had a lot to show. Have you ever experienced a moment so intense that, even after it's all over, it feels like the world stopped at the exact moment it happened? A type of silence that is not just the absence of sound, but the certainty that something deep, immense and inexplicable has just touched your soul. It was like this when the old man, kneeling among the rubble, read the laminated note, crumpled by time and tragedy. Those short words written in a child's handwriting said more than 1,000 explanations could. "If something happens to me, please take care of Bolt." It was such a simple sentence, but so full of love, of fear, of farewell, that the man's heart almost couldn't bear it. In front of him there was not just one paper, there was a whole life contained in a few words. The last request of a boy who, even in the face of danger, thought of his best friend first. A request that crossed fire, time, loneliness, and reached him. The old man stayed there for minutes that seemed eternal, the case still in her hands, her fingertips trembling, her eyes teary. Beside him, the puppy, now with a recognized name, history, and soul, remained quiet, as if he was also feeling the weight of that reunion. There was no barking, there was no fussing, just a firm presence, like someone who finally understands that they have been heard. At that moment, everything made sense. The backpack thrown into the bush, the weakened state in which he was found, the absence of the dog's body in the ruins, The disappearance after the fire. Someone, perhaps Samuel's own mother or a moved neighbor, must have found the note. And even though he was unable to care, he was sensitive enough to fulfill that last wish. He didn't know how to care. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he didn't want to get involved. But at least he tried to give the puppy a chance. Throwing it in the bush, inside the backpack, hoping that someone good would find it. And that's exactly what happened. The old man who had walked that trail so many times without imagining what awaited him now knew that it was no coincidence. Nothing about it was a coincidence. It was destiny. It was love guiding the steps even after the end. They returned home in silence. The note, kept with great care, now occupied a special place on the bedroom dresser next to Bolt's bowl and an old portrait that the man decided to frame with the image of the house's ruin, a symbol of where it all began. Bolt looked different. Not just healthier physically, but more whole, more at peace, as if he had finally found his place in the world. The old man has also changed. He was no longer the lonely man who walked along trails seeking only fresh air and distraction. Now he carried the responsibility of keeping alive a history that could not be forgotten. Samuel, even at such a young age, had done something great. He gave everything for love. He thought about the other until the last second, and he managed to save what was his soul in four-legged form. The days that followed were of reconstruction, not from the house in ruins, but from faith in love, in dedication, in true loyalty. Bolt adapted to the new routine as if the place had always been his. He ran around the yard, slept at the foot of the sofa, and whenever he could, he placed his nose on the old man's lap as if to say, "I remember, and now I can live in peace." But there was something more. Something that no one said out loud, but that was present in the gestures, in the looks. The story of Bolt and Samuel was more than exciting. It was a reminder, a silent warning for a world that lives in a rush, distracted, without time to notice the little things. Sometimes a simple gesture, like stopping to listen to a sound coming from the bush or opening a backpack thrown among the bushes, can change everything. This could save a life. You can make one last wish come true. The old man started to walk around the city differently. People started to notice. Some came up to him, asked about the puppy, remembered the tragedy, commented on how it all seemed like something out of a movie. He smiled with sadness and hope. He told the story calmly, respecting the silences, but made a point of sharing what he learned, that animals are not just company, but extensions of our own soul. And sometimes, when the world seems to be falling apart, they are the ones holding us back. Over time, Bolt became a well-known figure. He walked with the old man through the streets, sat next to him on benches in the square, received affection from children who, without understanding the whole story, felt something special about him, a different look, a calmness in the body, a sweetness that is not seen in every dog. He was more than a dog. It was a living memory of a love that resisted the impossible. But the old man knew that this story wasn't just his. She belonged to the world. It was one of those that needed to be told, repeated, shared, because it carried something rare: purity, the courage of a boy, a dog's loyalty, the kindness of a stranger, and the certainty that true love never dies. At night, before going to sleep, the old man would sometimes take the note and read it out loud like a prayer. Bolt, lying next to the bed, listened attentively, and even without understanding all the words, he seemed to recognize the essence, because deep down all that note said was, "Take care of him as I would." And that's exactly what the old man did. With each bowl served, with each blanket arranged, with each walk along the trails, not out of obligation, but out of honor, for love. But, even with my heart warmed, there was still one last question in the air, one that didn't need to be said, but that haunted the thoughts of those who knew the story. What else did that puppy keep inside him? What memories were still hidden deep in Bolt's heart, waiting for the right moment to surface? Have you ever had the feeling that no matter how much life changes, certain names carry within them a piece of someone's soul? As if uttering that word was almost like calling a feeling back into existence? That was exactly how the old man felt when he looked at the puppy, now clean, healthy, and with brighter eyes, and said in a firm but emotional voice, "You will be called Bolt." It wasn't just a name. It was a bridge, an invisible bond between the past and the present, between the boy who loved him until the last second and the man who now promised to continue that love. It was a silent rescue, not only of the dog's life, but of Samuel's memory. And at that moment, something changed. In the cub's eyes. As if he understood. As if he had finally found who he was again. The old man didn't need proof. I didn't need any exams, any documents. Everything he needed was there, in front of him. In the intense gaze the dog now had. A look that carried gratitude, yeah, but also memory. Because Bolt wasn't just a survivor. It was living memory. It was surviving love. And now, finally, I had a new home. The house started to have a different rhythm. The days became lighter, more full of purpose. The old man, who previously spoke little, now found himself talking to Bolt as if he were exchanging ideas with an old friend, and in a way it was. The connection between the two was deep, almost mystical. I didn't need words, just a gesture, a movement, a shared silence. Bolt seemed to remember everything, not as humans remember, in sentences or images, but in the way that only animals know, in the form of sensations, reactions, instincts. He recognized sounds coming from the city. He flinched at the noise of fireworks, but he relaxed completely when he heard the old man's keys jingling or the sound of the old radio playing softly in the kitchen. It was as if the new home was, at the same time, a new life and a continuation of something that had begun long before. As the days went by, Bolt began to show traces of surprising intelligence. He knew the right time to lie down, the exact place where the old man left his socks, the time to get his slippers from the door. But there was more. There was something about his behavior that went beyond training or instinct. It was careful, a kind of attention that moved. Bolt didn't just live in the house, he took care of it. He took care of the old man. It was common to see him awake in the middle of the night, watching the hallway, leaning against the bedroom door like a guardian. And when the old man spent more time quietly, thinking, Bolt would approach and put his nose on his knee, as if asking if everything was okay. He knew, I felt. He noticed every change in mood, every memory that weighed on the man's heart, and he insisted on being there, to be presence, of being love. Over time, people in the city began to learn about the story, not because the old man was telling, but because Bolt spoke for himself. Wherever he went, he attracted attention, not because of its beauty, although it was a dog with a striking look, but because of its posture, for serenity, for the wisdom in the look. Children wanted to play with him, adults stopped to pet him, elderly people were moved to hear the story told in whispers from mouth to mouth, and everyone, without exception, started treating him as if they knew. That puppy was different. There was something magical about seeing Bolt adapt so well, and at the same time maintain certain quirks that seemed to come from before. He always lay in the same corner of the porch, with his head resting on the same broken brick. He barked at the television whenever the flames appeared. He never touched shoes, as if he had been taught to respect all that. And every time he heard someone say the name Samuel, even from afar, his ears perked up, and he stared for a few seconds, as if trying to hear better. The old man, with his heart increasingly involved, began to write. He took old notebooks and tried to record everything he experienced with Bolt. He wasn't a writer. It never was. But there was something about that story that he knew couldn't be lost. And there, between scribbled pages, stories emerged of the days, the discoveries, the memories. It was his way of keeping Samuel close, to give voice to the love that now guided them both. And even in the simplest moments, there was beauty. The old man preparing coffee and Bolt sitting next to the stove. The old man taking care of the garden and Bolt watching everything, attentive. The afternoons on the balcony, the sunset turning everything orange, and the dog lying with his head on the man's legs, breathing in peace. Everything had another meaning now, because home wasn't made of walls and it was made of shared stories. Bolt was no longer the fragile puppy, rescued from a backpack in the woods. It was now a symbol of survival, of loyalty, of love that crosses life and death. And the old man, with all the scars that life had left, was also transformed. I found strength where there was once loneliness. I found purpose where before there was only routine, because now there was a name echoing through the house. A name that was not just a memory, but a presence. And every time he called Bolt, something in the air calmed. It was as if Samuel himself was there, silent, happy to know that his friend was being loved, that his last request had been granted, that his legacy had found roots. Have you ever stopped to think about how insistent love is? How much does it resist time, pain, and even death? There are stories that prove this without needing grand gestures, without needing difficult words. They reveal themselves in the simplest details, in a look that recognizes, in a lick that comforts, in a silence shared between two hearts that loved each other before knowing what love was. Bolt's story is one of those. He survived not only by luck, not just because someone found it in time. Bolt survived because someone, still very young, believed that his love was too important to be forgotten. A boy, just a boy, but with a heart so full of feeling that he was able, in the last minutes of his life, to think about protecting those he loved most. That backpack thrown into the woods, which at first seemed like just another sad scene of abandonment, today carries a much greater meaning. She was the last hug, the last gesture of care, the last attempt to ensure that even if he was no longer there, Bolt would have a chance to continue, to be happy, to be loved again. And it was, because true love doesn't die. It does not disappear with fire, with loss, with time. He hides sometimes, yes, retreats into a small bruised body, but he's still there, barking softly, breathing deeply, waiting to be seen, waiting to be remembered. Bolt was remembered, found, welcomed, not by chance, but because the love that began with Samuel was too strong to end. And when the old man took him in his arms and called him by name, everything made sense. That was love coming back in a way of looking, of company, of life. This story shows us that a dog's love doesn't end when life ends. He stays, he resists, he survives, and sometimes it comes back, not like before, but with the same intensity, with the same delivery, because a dog never loves halfway, never forget who made you feel safe, and he never stops looking for those who once made him happy. Bolt is living proof that a gesture of love, no matter how small it may seem, can go through anything. You can change destinations, you can write different endings. Samuel, with his childish hands and his giant soul, left a message for the world. Take care of him. And this request echoed until it was answered. So the next time you look at a stray dog, a needy look, or a forgotten story, remember this. Maybe there is love there too, waiting for a second chance. Maybe there's someone there too who just needs to be heard. Someone who, like Bolt, still barks softly, asking to be loved again. Because true love, it never goes away. He just waits. Wait to be seen. Wait for someone like you. Stories like Bolt's touch us in a way that is difficult to explain in words. Somehow this kind of connection rekindles something inside us, that forgotten faith, that true love, even when hurt, finds a way to return. And perhaps today, this video reminded you of that. It warmed your heart, or simply made you breathe deeper. If it was like this for you, imagine the good this story could do out there. Clicking on like, you spread this feeling, and when sign up, guarantees that he will continue walking with us through stories even more intense and surprising than this one, because what's coming is strong, much more than you imagine. So comment below the word hope. Only those who truly felt it will understand, and take advantage of the fact that the next video is already on your screen. It's not just a continuation, it's the piece that will fit together everything you've felt so far. Take it from me, you'll want to experience this too.